So now we'll be beginning with a new chapter of the human body system. Known as digestion and absorption. Biomicromolecules in food cannot be utilized by a body in their original form. They have to be broken down and converted into simple substances in the digestive system, and this is what is done in the process of digestion, wherein complex food substances are broken down into simple absorbable forms and is carried out by the digestive system of a body by mechanical and biochemical reactions and methods. Mechanical and biochemical, where a large number of digestive glands are involved. Methods. Before we proceed ahead, we will have to study the digestive system of a body. Part of his alimentary canal. The alimentary canal begins with an anterior opening in the mouth and it opens out posteriorly through the anus. The mouth leads to the buccal cavity or the oral cavity. So the alimentary canal is from the mouth to the anus. The mouth leads to the oral or the buccal cavity, which shows presence of a number of teeth and a muscular tongue. Teeth plus tongue is what is found in the oral cavity. Each tooth is embedded in a socket or jawbone, and this type of attachment is called thecodent. The jawbone is there wherein a tooth is found attached. Thecodent type of arrangement. Majority of mammals, including human beings, form two sets of teeth during their life. A set of temporary milk or deciduous teeth are replaced by a set of permanent or adult teeth at a later stage in their lives. This type of dentition is called dipodent. Type of dentition. When two different sets of teeth found during different stages of life is called dipodent. An adult human has 32 permanent teeth which are of four different types. Four different types, namely I, C, P, M and N, wherein I stands for incisors, C for canines, PM for premolars and M for molars. We show specific arrangement in each half of the upper and lower jaw in the order of I, C, PM and M only, and their numbers can be remembered by the dental formula which says 2, 1, 2, 3, which is very important. The hard chewing surface of the teeth is made up of enamel, which is the component of teeth. The oral cavity then leads into a short pharynx which serves as a common passage for food and air, which is a very important question. Common passage for food and air. For food and air is the pharynx. The oral cavity is followed by this part which contains a cartilaginous flap called the epiglottis, which prevents the entry of food into the glottis opening of the windpipe during swallowing. Glottis is the opening of the windpipe. And epiglottis is the flap which avoids entry of food in the glottis or through the glottis inside the windpipe. After the pharynx, we have a part known as the oesophagus, which is a thin and a long tube which extends posteriorly, passing through the neck. It passes through the neck, the thorax, and the diaphragm, and leads to a J-shaped bag called the stomach. J-shaped bag, which is used for the storage of food, known as stomach. A muscular sphincter regulates the opening of the esophagus into the stomach. The stomach is located in the upper left portion of the abdominal cavity and has three major parts, which is the cardia, funding region, and the pyloric region. J-shaped organ showing presence of the fundus, the cardiac part, and the pyloric part. The pyloric portion opens into the first part of the small intestine. The small intestine is distinguished into three regions. Small intestine has three regions. Just like the stomach, it has three regions. The first being the U-shaped duodenum. The second, or the middle portion, is a coiled portion known as the jejunum, and the third portion is known as the ileum, which is highly coiled. So both these structures are coiled. The opening of the stomach into the duodenum is guarded by a pyloric sphincter. The ileum, which is the lowermost part of the small intestine, opens into the large intestine, which consists of three parts again. Namely, the cecum, the colon, and the rectum, which is the lowermost part. The cecum is a small blind sac with symbiotic microorganisms. The cecum opens into the colon, which is divided into three parts: an ascending, a transverse, and a descending part. Cecum is a blind sac. The colon has three parts: the ascending, transverse, and the descending part. The descending part opens into the rectum, which opens out through the anus. Which is the lowermost part of the alimentary canal. The wall of the alimentary canal from the esophagus to the rectum possesses 4 layers, namely, wall of the alimentary canal consists of 4 layers, namely serosa, muscularis, submucosa, and the mucosa. So it is SM, serosa, muscularis, submucosa, and mucosa. Serosa is the outermost layer and is made up of a thin mesothelium, epithelium of visceral organisms with small connective tissues. So it is made up of mesothelium. Muscularis is formed by smooth muscles usually arranged into an inner circular and outer longitudinal layer. To be remembered, inner circular and outer longitudinal. Inner circular and outer longitudinal layer. An oblique muscle layer may be present in some regions. The submucosal layer is formed of loose connective tissues containing nerves, blood, and lymph vessels. Loose connective tissue showing presence of nerves, blood, and lymph. In duodenum, glands are also present in the submucosa. The innermost layer lining the lumen of the alimentary canal is the mucosa. Mucosa lines the lumen or the cavity of the alimentary canal. This layer shows or forms irregular folds called rugae in the stomach and finger-like foldings called villi in the small intestine. Form folds or projections named as rugae, the stomach, villi, the small intestine. The cells lining the villi produce numerous microscopic projections called microvilli, giving a brush border appearance. These modifications increase the surface area of the stomach and the small intestine enormously. Mucosal epithelium has globulate cells which secrete mucus that helps in lubrication. So lubrication through the cells named globulates is also important function of mucosa. Mucosa also forms glands in the stomach known as gastric glands and crypts in between the bases of villi in the intestine. Now we'll be studying the digestive glands. Which are found inside the body and aid in the process of digestion. The digestive glands associated with the alimentary canal include the salivary glands, the liver, and the pancreas. The liver and the pancreas. The saliva is mainly produced by three pairs of salivary glands: parotids, cheek, the submaxillary or submandibular, which are found in the lower jaw, and the sublinguals below the tongue. Parotid, see in the cheek, submaxillary or submandibular, found in the lower jaw, and sublingual, which we can make out from the name, is found below the tongue. These glands are situated just outside the buccal cavity, secrete salivary juice into the buccal cavity, which aids in the process of digestion or churning of food. Liver is the largest gland of the body, which is a very important point, and weighs approximately 1.2 to 1.5 kg, which is almost similar to the weights of all important parts of the body, like the brain too. It is situated in the abdominal cavity just below the diaphragm and has two lobes known as the hepatic lobes. The hepatic lobules are the structural and function units of the liver, containing hepatic cells. Hepatic cells arranged in the form of cords. Each lobule is covered by thin connective tissue sheet called the Glisson's capsule. Capsule is the sheet which covers each lobe. The bile secreted by the hepatic cells passes through the hepatic ducts and is stored and concentrated in a thin muscular sac called the gallbladder. The duct of the gallbladder, cystic duct, along with the hepatic duct from the liver, forms the common bile duct. So from the gallbladder, we have the cystic duct or the gallbladder duct. From the liver, we have a duct coming which is known as hepatic duct, and these two ducts come together forming the common duct, common bile duct, which at a later stage combines with the duct coming from the pancreas, known as the pancreatic duct. Giving rise to the hepatopancreatic duct. Hepato for liver and pancreatic for pancreas, a duct whose opening is guarded by a spinster called the spinster of Oddi or Oddi spinster. The pancreas are a compound type of a gland. Both endocrine and exocrine secretions are seen, which is an important fact about the pancreas, and are situated between the limbs of the U-shaped duodenum, which is a part of the small intestine. The exocrine portion secretes an alkaline pancreatic juice containing enzymes, and the endocrine portion secretes hormones, insulin, and glucagon. It is important that we remember the secretions. Exocrine part, pancreatic juice containing enzymes, and the endocrine part has hormones, insulin, and glucagon. Now we'll be studying the digestion of food. So now we'll study the actual process of digestion with the help of the digestive glands. The process of digestion is accomplished by mechanical and chemical processes. It begins in the buccal cavity. The buccal cavity performs two major functions. One is mastication of food, and second is facilitation of swallowing. Buccal cavity is the first part. Buccal cavity, also known as the oral cavity. Two functions: mastication of food and facilitation of swallowing. The teeth and the tongue, with the help of saliva, masticate and mix out the food thoroughly. Mucus in saliva helps in lubricating and adhering the masticated food particles into a bolus. Mucus in saliva helps in mastication of food in the form of a bolus. The bolus is then conveyed into the pharynx and then into the esophagus by swallowing or deglutition. Sorry. The bolus further passes down through the esophagus by successive waves of muscular contractions called as peristalsis. These are muscular contractions. The gastroesophageal sphincter controls the passage of food into the stomach. Important part of the system, gastroesophageal sphincter. The saliva concentrated into the oral cavity contains electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and chlorine, and enzymes like salivary amylase and lysosome. So these are the enzymes in addition to the electrolytes on saliva. The chemical processes of digestion is initiated in the oral cavity by the hydrolytic action of the carbohydrate splitting enzyme, salivary amylase, which is carbohydrate splitting enzyme. About 30% of starch is hydrolyzed here by salivary amylase, which is broken down in presence of water, which is known as hydrolysis. Lysosome present in saliva acts as an antibacterial agent that prevents infections. So these are the functions of these enzymes. The mucus of stomach has gastric glands. Gastric glands are three major types of cells, namely mucosa of the stomach, which is a part of the stomach, has gastric glands, which has three different types of cells. Firstly, mucus cell, mucus neck cells specifically, secrete mucus. Then we have peptic or chief cells, which secrete the pre-enzyme which is a precursor to an enzyme known as pepsinogen, and parietal or oxyntic cells which secrete HCl, an intrinsic factor which is responsible or helps in the absorption of vitamin B12, which is cyanocobalamin. The stomach stores the food for 4 to 5 hours. 4 to 5 hours is what the stomach stores the food for. The food mixes thoroughly with the acidic gastric juice of the stomach by churning movements of its muscular wall and is called chyme or chyme. After mixing, the proenzyme pepsinogen on exposure to hydraulic acid gets converted into the active enzyme pepsin, which is the proteolytic enzyme of the stomach. Pepsinogen on action by HCl gets converted into pepsin. The function of pepsin is to convert proteins into proteoses and peptones. Proteins on action of pepsin is converted to proteoses and peptones. HCl provides the acidic pH, which is around 1.8, which is optimal for the action of pepsins. Renin is a proteolytic enzyme found in gastric juice of infants, which helps in the digestion of milk and milk-related products or proteins. Small amount of lipases are also secreted by gastric glands. So one important name is renin, which helps digestion of milk proteins. Now we'll talk about the pancreatic juice. The pancreatic juice contains inactive enzymes such as several inactive enzymes such as the trypsinogen, the chymotrypsinogen, procarboxylate peptidase, the amylase, lipase, and nucleases. Trypsinogen is an activated enzyme which is activated by an enzyme enterokinase secreted by the intestinal mucosa. So it is activated by enterokinase. It is extremely important that we remember these names while we talk about the digestive system. Trypsinogen in turn activates an enzyme known as, gets activated to an enzyme known as trypsin, which in turn activates another enzyme known as the pancreatic juice. The bile released into the duodenum contains bile pigments, namely bilirubin and biliverdin, bile salts, cholesterol, and phospholipids, but no enzymes. So trypsinogen gets converted to trypsin, which activates other enzymes in the pancreatic juice, which we'll study at a later stage. Bile contains bile pigments, which is bilirubin and biliverdin. Bilirubin and biliverdin. Bile salts, cholesterol in some amount, but no enzymes. Bile helps in emulsification of fats, that is breaking down of fats into small micelles. Emulsification of fats to small micelles. Bile also activates lipases. The intestinal mucosa epithelium has goblet cells which secrete mucus. The secretions of the brush border cells of the mucosa along with the secretions of the goblet cells constitute the intestinal juice or the succus entericus, which is the intestinal juice formed of secretions of the mucus and the goblet cells. This juice contains a variety of enzymes like disaccharidases, dipeptidases, lipases, and nucleosidases, which, as the names are suggesting, are responsible for the digestion of or the breakdown of disaccharides, peptides or peptones, which are proteins. Lipases are responsible for the breakdown of lipids, and nucleosidases for the breakdown of nucleoside, which are formed due to breakdown of nucleotides of nucleic acids. The enzymes in the Succus entericus act on the end products of the above reactions to form the respective simple absorbable forms. These final steps in digestion occur very close to the mucosal epithelial cells of the intestine. The breakdown of biomacromolecules mentioned occurs in the duodenum region of the small intestine. The different breakdowns which may occur in the duodenum region are breakdown of dipeptides by the action of dipeptidases into amino acids, breakdown of maltose, sugars like maltose, under the action of maltase like enzymes into glucose plus glucose, breakdown of lactose in the presence of lactase like enzymes into glucose plus galactose, breakdown of sucrose in the presence of sucrase into glucose plus fructose, and breakdown of nucleotides into sugars plus bases in the presence of nucleotidases and nucleosidases. Di and monoglycerides in the presence of lipases get converted into fatty acids and glycerol. Di and monoglycerides under the action of lipases get converted to fatty acids and glycerol, which are the components of fats found in the body. The breakdown of no significant digestive activity occurs in the large intestine. However, the following functions are performed by the large intestine: absorption of some water, minerals, and drugs, if any, secretion of mucus, which helps in the adhering the waste particles together and lubricating it for an easy passage. The undigested and unabsorbed substances called feces enter into the cecum of the large intestine through the ileocecal valve, which prevents the backflow of the fecal matter. It is temporarily stored in the rectum till defecation. The activities of the gastrointestinal tract are under control of neural and hormonal control for proper coordination of different parts. Now we'll study the absorption of the digested products. Absorption is the process by which the end products of the digestion pass through the intestinal mucosa into the blood or lymph. End products of digestion pass through the intestinal mucosa to blood or lymph. It is carried out by passive, active or facilitated transport mechanisms, wherein in passive no energy is consumed, while in active cases energy is to be provided by the body. Small amounts of monosaccharides like glucose, amino acids and some electrolytes like chloride ions are generally absorbed by simple diffusion. The passage of these substances into the blood depends upon the concentration gradients. However, some of the substances like fructose and some amino acids are absorbed with the help of the carrier ions like sodium. This mechanism is called facilitated transport. So there can be two different types of mechanisms. First, simple diffusion, and next facilitated transport. Transport of water depends upon the osmotic gradient. Active transport occurs against the concentration gradient and hence requires energy. Various nutrients like amino acids, monosaccharides like glucose, and electrolytes like sodium are absorbed into the blood by this mechanism. Fatty acids plus glycerol, being insoluble, cannot be absorbed into the blood. They are first incorporated into the small droplets called micelles, which move into the intestinal mucosa. They are reformed into very small protein-coated flat globules called the chylomicrons, which are transported into the lymph vessels in the villi. These lymph vessels ultimately release the absorbed substances into the bloodstream. So fatty acids plus glycerol act on the micelles, which are small droplets. They move into the intestinal mucosa and they are reformed into very small protein coated fat globules called as the chylomicrons, which are transported into the lymph vessels or the lacteals in the villi, which are irregulations in the intestine. These lymph vessels ultimately release the absorbed substances into the bloodstream. Go to the lymph vessels, also known as lacteals, and ultimately go into the blood. Absorption of substances takes place in the different parts of the alimentary canal like mouth, stomach, small intestine and large intestine. However, maximum absorption occurs in the small intestine. The absorbed substances finally reach the tissues which utilize them for their activities. This process is known as assimilation. The digestive waste solidified into coherent feces in the rectum initiate a neural reflex causing an urge or desire for its removal. The digestion of feces to the outside through the anal opening is known as defecation and a voluntary process and is carried out by a mass peristaltic movement. So the entire process of digestion, one part is extremely important, which is the small intestine.